Every artist has a different way of drawing the same thing, which is incredible. And today I'm going to show you how I draw a finished illustration from start to finish. Hello, welcome back to my channel. Wait. Coffee. Plants. Now I feel complete. Hello, welcome back to my channel. Hope you're doing well. Over on my Instagram, I asked you guys if you wanted to see my drawing process for my traditional art first or my digital art, and an overwhelming majority wanted to see my traditional art process. If you wanted to see my digital art process, don't worry. That's still gonna come at some point. I'm going to show you today how I just make an illustration from start to finish, because, you know, in this illustration I'm going to be using Copic markers because that is what I most use in my traditional art. But let me know if you're interested in seeing how I work with other materials. Got a brand new kneaded eraser. Forgot about that. So a lot of the stuff that I talk about in this video can also be applied to other materials. The sketching is pretty much the same for any medium I use, and then the line art, if it's a medium that requires line art, then it's the same there too. But if you want to know how I use other materials, let me know, because I'd definitely be happy to share it with you guys. The first step that I do, I actually did off camera, because to be honest, it's not very interesting, and that is drawing thumbnails. This isn't something that I do for every finished illustration, but it's something that I do for a lot of my finished illustrations. Specifically in videos, if it's just drawing for me, I usually don't do thumbnails just because I don't feel like it. Drawing thumbnails is a really important thing. It just helps you play around with different ideas, and if it's like a bigger piece, helps you play with things like composition and maybe even lighting, depending on how much you work on the thumbnails. So yeah, I have some, my tripod's in the way, dear lord. Oh, don't spill the coffee. I have some thumbnails here. They're not very interesting, they're very quick. They literally take me not even a minute each normally. I usually just throw some scribbles on paper, and then if I don't like it, I throw more scribbles on paper until I get some scribbles that I kind of like, and then I play around with those ideas. So there we go. So yeah, feel free to grab your sketchbook, grab a warm drink. I've got my coffee, and just hang out with me for a little bit and draw. It'll be fun. Hopefully. I promise. Maybe. I shouldn't promise that. So yeah, once you get your thumbnails done, the sketching part, I just threw my pencil. It's fine. Now, the way I started sketching is extra as hell. I have 3 different pencils that I use. I just want to make it very clear. This is absolutely unnecessary. Again, I'm just extra as hell. So this is what I do. In my digital art process, I usually have 3 different sketching layers, and then on the first layer, I'll have a really thick brush that I'll use to just block out a pose. On the second layer, I'll use kind of like a medium-sized brush to block out the more defined shapes. So like I'm usually drawing a character, I'll use it to block out like the character's hair and clothing and everything. And then I'll use an even smaller brush to refine it. And so I thought, let's translate that into traditional art. So I have these. These are Mr. Pen pencils, in case you're wondering. It's 2mm, 0.5mm, and 0.3mm. Again, absolutely unnecessary. You don't need to do that. I used 0.7 for the longest time, and then I used just 0.5 for the longest time. Also, the paper I'm using, this is just plain cardstock. If you're using alcohol markers, I recommend cardstock for just a very cheap kind of alternative to marker paper, I guess. I have used marker paper, so I can also recommend that. I've also used Bristol board, I can recommend that. Erasers, I have both a regular eraser and a kneaded eraser. As you saw, this is a Faber-Castell brand. This one's brand new. And then this, I don't know the brand of, but honestly, as long as an eraser erases, you don't need anything fancy. I use both because a kneaded eraser is great for lightening up a sketch. So if you are sketching in phases like me, or if you have a part of a sketch that you don't really like and you want to fix on that specifically, this is really great for lightening that up. But then this actually makes the pencil kind of disappear. Let's actually get to drawing, shall we? Whenever I'm making the finished illustration, I always have my thumbnails nearby. I have it off camera, and then I'll go for it. The reason I sketch the way I do, where it's in like on digital art, it would be layers. I kind of just say phases, I guess, for traditional art. So then that way, I'm very loose with it. If I focus too much on pinning down finer details too early on, the drawings come out very stiff, and also, let's say I work really hard on the head and I work on refining all those details and then I draw the body, the head might be out of proportion and then the rest of the body looks weird. But then also I spent all that time on that head, so I don't want to erase it. So this just helps me not only make things more loose and flowy, but also just helps me place things in the drawing so I don't have to worry too much about fixing them later. I'm just real messy with it. And then when that's done, can move this guy over here, take our eraser, make it into a little worm, and then we lighten this up. And now that we have this general gesture down, focus on making the character now. This is where I start focusing more on defining the features a little bit, but still, I'm not too worried about pinning things down exactly. Like here, I'm starting to carve out the silhouette of the face, but I'm not too specific with it. I'm just still very loose. This is also where I start erasing more often. I very rarely erase in the first step because, again, it's very loose and very flowy. Here, I'm still not trying to make things perfect, but I'm starting to make them a little bit more refined, so there's a little bit more erasing involved. And then the final sketching phase part thing. That is when I start erasing the most and trying to actually finalize things a little more. And also, as always, I have not warmed up. I'm really bad at practicing what I preach. Warm up before making a finished illustration. It'll help you so much. I just never do that. So don't be like me and warm up. When I'm in the different stages of sketching, I kind of work at different speeds. Like in the first thing where I was just blocking out the pose, I was really, really fast and quick and loose. And here is still kind of fast, I guess, but just a little bit slower. And then on the third sketching phase, I slow down a lot and really focus on the details. Here, I'm still essentially just blocking in shapes, just more specifically to the character rather than just a general body reference. Reference? Gesture. Don't know why I said reference. That's a good reminder though. Use references. I'm having a difficult time with this hand. I think that's a little bit better. When I'm sketching this character on top, I'm still very much keeping in the first sketch layer in mind. I don't need to follow it exactly. Like if there's something I don't like about it, of course change it. It's more of just like a point of reference to draw the character on top of, rather than a clear-cut guideline of this is what you need to do. Once that's done, you go to get your little eraser guy again. If you don't have a kneaded eraser, I'd very much recommend one. And then we use this as a sort of reference for the details we're going to be putting on top. This, I guess, would be another reason why thumbnailing would be important. So for me, I'm drawing a character that I've had for years now, so I'm very familiar with her design. But if you don't have any sort of original character and you're making an illustration of a person, thumbnailing can help you figure out the details of that person. Okay, so could you not mow the lawn right outside my window? Am I gonna have to pause filming? If you could move somewhere else, that'd be great. I think the ear needs to be brought in a little bit closer. I need to study where ears go. I always think I know, but alas, I do not. Ah! So yeah, in case you guys are wondering why my lead always breaks so often, it's because I'm using 0.3mm lead. Stop mowing your lawn. Okay, this guy and his lawnmower is really getting on my last nerve. The grass doesn't need a haircut, sir. I'm gonna let that resolve. I'll be back when he's not directly outside my window. Okay, does that sound good? Thank you. He's away now, I think. I mean, he's mostly away. Back to, oh no. I spilled coffee. It's okay. This is fine. It's okay. Everything is a-okay. Everything is fine. It's gone now, see? Now let's actually continue. Now I have to make the decision of, do I make the floof go off the page or not? I really didn't account for having to cut the top part off. Now the composition is ever so slightly strange, but I guess I can deal with it. When I do line art, I usually add a hatching effect, which is why I start to add a little bit of shading with the pencil, just so then that way, even if a lot of it does get lost, I can use it to help me decide where the hatching will go. And then you click your pencil a ton, because the lead is broken. This is some excellent content, huh? Then you could just continue drawing. So you always do. I don't know. I don't have anything else to say at this point. The rest of the sketching phase is just this. It's just chiseling away at stuff. The sketching part tends to go by at different paces for a lot of people. Sketching does tend to take me a little longer because of the art style I have. I really like a bunch of finer details in my art. So if you have a more simplistic art style, this will go by a lot faster for you. And also, I don't want people to take that and think that like a more simple art style is quote unquote worse than an art style like mine where I put a lot of detail in it, because that's just quite simply not true. There's a lot of other aspects of art that's not just detail. Whenever I'm adding in smaller details, it's kind of important to remember not only the shape of the thing, I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, but then also the angle that things are at. For this part, right, I'm drawing, can get it right, I'm drawing the cuff of her jacket, and so it's over her arm, which is a very round thing, so I have to make sure that it wraps around the arm in a way that sort of makes sense. And then also her body is sort of tilted this way, so like the angle of her shoulders is like this rather than straight. Since it's like this, you would see a little bit more inside the cuff of the sleeve, but then down here, because her arm is going back this way, you wouldn't see inside of the sleeve at all. With stuff like that, it's really important to keep in mind because you might have a clear picture in your head of what angle something is at, but stuff like that can really give it away and make it not look like it's at the proper angle. If I drew this more like straight, I guess, it wouldn't give off the impression that the arm is at the angle that it's at. You know, that sounded like a big garbled word mess, but I hope you understand what I mean. I don't color in darker shades with line art, but I do color in like darker shadows. So like if something is black, I wouldn't color it in with my line art. I would color it in with like a dark gray with whatever material I'm coloring with. But there are some shades that are like the darkest shadows in the drawing I'll color in with the line art. So like right here, and then here, and then in the hair. Those are things that I would color in with the liner. Right now, I'm focusing on like flex. So right now with this arm, I'm worried it doesn't look like an arm because this is very curved, like right here, instead of it being more straight. I guess because of where her actual arm is and the bagginess of both of her sleeves and the angle that everything's at, it would kind of make sense. Logically, it would make sense, but also visually it looks kind of strange. So there are situations where even if something makes sense, you have to change it for the sake of it looking not awkward. Not all the time. Sometimes it just looks awkward because you aren't used to seeing something like that. Real life doesn't always translate to illustrations so nicely. So in those situations, you would have to make those adjustments. I can't talk. Oh, it's a little tangent-y. If you are unaware of what tangents are, so you see where this thumb was in terms of like where the cuff is, it kind of fits perfectly in that little like angle right there. You don't want that because it looks a little awkward. Whenever you catch something like that, just make some adjustments. At least in most cases. With art, I'm always reluctant to say, like, don't do this, don't do that, because even if there are quote-unquote rules to art, any rule in art can be broken if there's a purpose for breaking it. So there are a lot of times where I can say, like, this composition seems too cramped, but sometimes you would want a cramped composition, depending on what type of mood you want to give. So I'm always reluctant to give, like, solid advice, I guess. I'm always like, do this, but also don't. Sorry if it's very unhelpful. Heifer coat. Filling back with what I like to call anime wind. There's no actual wind, but there's wind for the purpose of making things look dramatic and cool. So that's what's going on in this drawing. It happens a lot in my art. I guess you would kind of see the other part of her coat peeking out behind here a little bit. I don't know if this right here makes sense, but I mean, it looks cool. For now, I'll keep it, and it'll probably stay that way, because, you know, I think this would be at a different angle. Because of how her body is tilted, I think this would be more up here. I think her whole body should be shifted, actually. So let's see, if that's there, that should be there. I think this is a little better. I think that's a good sketch. This space right here, one thing I do a lot with my illustrations is I fill it with washi tape. And this is like a spot where I would put washi tape. Now we take our kneaded eraser for the last time in this illustration, make it into a worm once again. And then we lighten up the sketch for the final time. I do this just because it helps me focus a lot more on the line art. For all you digital artists out there, This is basically the equivalent of turning down the opacity on your sketch layer or layers. If you're real fancy, maybe even a folder. What I use for line art differs per drawing, really. So I'll show you a couple of different line art stuff that I use. Liners that I used to use all the time, but honestly very rarely use now, are these ones. It's the Copic multi-liner SP. Come in a bunch of different sizes, and then these specific ones are refillable. The reason I don't use these as much anymore is because they're black ink, and I don't use a lot of black ink anymore. I'll talk about why in a little bit. They used to sell these refillable ones in various colors, but those have been discontinued, so I don't use these anymore. I'll sometimes reach for them, but it's very rare that I do. Sometimes what I'll use is I'll use these sepia microns. Again, I have these in a whole bunch of different sizes. These work just fine. I like them. These are very popular amongst artists, and for good reason. They're fairly affordable and waterproof and ink-proof and all that fun stuff. And I think the ones that I use the most nowadays are these Copic liners. These ones are just called Copic multi-liners. These are in sepia. I like these ones because they are a lighter color than the Micron sepia, but if you don't want to get these, because these are a little bit pricier, if you get microns in brown rather than sepia, it's the same color as this, or like a very similar color rather. I like the color, and of course, as the name implies, they work well with Copic markers. Also, one more liner recommendation I forgot to mention here. I've used Staedtler multi-liners. I don't know if they come in colors, but I've used a set of black fine liners, and they worked pretty well. So there's another option for you. I normally use a couple of different liners in my illustration. So normally I'll have a pretty constant line art color for the rest of the illustration. I'll have a thinner one for the hatching, and then I'll have a thicker one for like filling in shadows. And then sometimes if there's like a really big spot like this one, I'll have an even thicker one on standby. And then I just go for it. The reason I don't like using black liners a lot anymore, because I like the soft look of other colors. Since these colors are very, very light, it gives the line art a super soft look. But even with just like these ones, these Micron sepia ones, even if the color is darker, it still gives it a softer look than if you were to use a black liner. But again, it's all personal preference. There's literally nothing wrong with using a black line art. In terms of switching between them, I normally just do it as I go along. Like, I could use this one and just outline everything that I would outline with this one and then go back with the other stuff. But I find I just forget stuff because small brain. So I just switch between them while I work. Aside from the hatching in the line art, what I like to do is I like to leave a lot of gaps in my line art. Even with just this, you can see there's a lot of places where I don't close the lines, and I just find that helps to make things a lot more, just a little bit looser, I guess. I don't know how to explain it. I think I've tried explaining this on my channel before, and also I failed. I'll try my best. Instead of it being like a solid outline of something, it's more of like an implication, I guess. So like, obviously this is pretty harshly outlining something, but it's like not a full outline. I don't know how to explain it. Somebody who's better with words, try to explain it for me. But I just find that it makes things, again, look softer and a little bit more lively than if I were to use a lot of closed lines. I think a lot of people tend to stress out over doing line art. For me, it's just more of like a mindless thing that I can do because the sketch is already there and I'm just going over all of the stuff I'm already doing. That didn't make any sense. Because I'm going over the stuff that I already did. I don't know, I find it kind of relaxing. So a lot of the time for lips, a lot of the definition I'll put in by coloring. This one's a little bit different because it's a side profile, so I do have to define the lips a little bit more. But if it's like a front-facing view or like a 3/4 view, I'll sketch the lips out. But then when the line art comes, I usually only will draw like the line of the mouth, I guess, and then I'll draw the lips in with color. Because of the way I do line art, it can sometimes take a pretty long time, but personally I think it's worth it. I think these things just make line art not only more enjoyable to do, but also more enjoyable to look at. Let's draw this hand first, because it's on top of the other stuff. Using the thinner liner, I'll also add in some more subtle details, I guess. On the hands, for example, that's when I'll add the tiny little wrinkles in the fingernails and such. Hello!
I said this your kneaded eraser?
I gave you a kneaded eraser. Would that...
No, this is not it. Mine is in my room.
Well, that must have been the kneaded eraser you lost then.
Mm-mm.
We have a phantom kneaded eraser. When I do line art, some people say that you have to draw really fast, some people say you have to draw really slow. Honestly, personally, I find it just depends on what line you're drawing. You might also notice sometimes I'll like draw and then I'll flick it out. That kind of gives a similar effect to like, you know how if you're drawing on a computer, like you're drawing digitally, and you have the pen pressure sensitivity, it kind of gives a similar effect as that. And that's also the same reason why I'll use several liners in the same drawing. Because having line width variation is a tip I see a lot for digital artists, but it's not something a lot of people seem to talk about for traditional art. I also find it a little bit easier to do line art when I draw towards my body. I feel like I have a little bit more control when I move downward. It's okay, Zola. You don't need to bark at every... You don't need to bark at everybody. You don't need to bark. Can you let me finish? Damn! Oh my god. That was almost bad. How did I get coffee over here? My favorite art medium. You! You're the culprit. Get out of here. No one invited you. I'm about done. So now we move on to the coloring phase. Okay, I finished drinking my coffee off camera, so hopefully this doesn't happen anymore. I also erased the pencil off camera because like that's boring. I always take my markers out before I start coloring just because it's a little bit easier to reach for the colors I need. I know exactly what I'm using. It just saves me some time later, so then that way once I start coloring I can just get right into it. I have my handy dandy chart. Copic has a printable chart that you can just print out and color on, but even if you aren't using this and you don't have like a pre-made chart, I would recommend just charting them anyway and swatching them, preferably on paper that you're also going to be using. So this one's printed on cardstock because the caps are a little bit different a lot of the time from what the colors actually look like, and even on a printed out color swatch thing that usually comes when you buy markers, even the way that those colors print are a lot of the time are different than how the ink looks. And also the ink can look different depending on what type of paper you're using it on. There's a lot going on, so swatch them out. On the back here there's even some swatches of markers that are on Copic. These I have a review video coming out soon, stay tuned. The way I pick colors, since this is a character that I have already made and she has like a color scheme, it's a little bit easier to pick colors for her. So if I'm coloring a character I have, I'll pick their colors. So I'll have a skin color, a highlight color, and then one shading color, usually two. And I'll also have one similar color that I'll use to shade with throughout the rest of the drawing. A big common one is this E4. It's like a very purpley sort of brown, but that one's kind of dead, so I'm not going to be using that one. Sometimes I'll have a couple different ones. It really depends on how dark the shade is, so this is the one I'm going to be going for. And since that one's a little bit darker, I'm going to add that in the darker shades, and then I'll have, let's see, let's go with that one. It's like a lighter one, and add that in lighter shades. I do that just because like not only does it make the drawing a little bit more interesting to look at, but it also helps make the colors blend a little bit nicer together. I think I'm actually going to take out a couple of these because I think my Copics of these colors are running a little dry on ink. I also have my Copics sorted out by these rubber bands, by like the color groups and everything. And if you don't want to go for the big boy Copics because money, they're very expensive. There are some other brands that I can recommend in the back here. I have these Tombow alcohol-based markers, which like I said, I'm going to be having a review video coming out soon. I'm assuming it's going to be coming out after this video. And then I also have some Prismacolor and Spectrum Noir. These ones right here are Prismacolor, and then these both are Spectrum Noir. Both pretty good brands. I can recommend both of them. I personally have not used Ohuhu markers, but I've seen those recommended quite a lot. But also another thing I want to point out is, yes, these Copics, I have a lot of them, but I want to make it very, very clear. I've collected these markers over the course of years. This isn't something that I just sat down and bought. The first time I bought Copics, it was a set of like 6. For a while, those are the only Copics that I had. Don't feel discouraged when you look at this and be like, wow, a lot of markers, because yeah, it is, but that's because I've been buying Copics for years. I would usually just pick out a couple at a time whenever I found myself having a little extra money. Normally when I color, I'll start with the skin I don't really know why. That's just what I tend to do. There's no reason for it. I just always gravitate towards the skin to start with. Regardless of what I'm coloring, whether it's the skin, hair, clothes, whatever, I'll add the highlight color and the base tone at the same time. I like to have my highlights and my base tone a lot more blended in than I tend to have my shadows, and so I add them at the same time. So I'll start putting down the base color. And when I color, you'll notice that I'll switch between going in little circles and little lines to like feathering this out. When you feather it out like that, it just makes it easier to blend. Coloring in more small areas and in the little circles and featherness, I don't know if that made any sense. Coloring in smaller areas like this helps get the colors to be more flat and smooth. Then feathering it out is better for blending. Now I go back to the dark color. Sometimes if you go over a darker color with a lighter marker, it'll lift the color a little bit, which is why sometimes you need to go back and layer on top again. And then I add the lips. For the lips, it's nothing fancy. I usually just go a color darker and then add shading later on. Boom, lips. Still kind of getting used to drawing lips in my art style, so there's not a whole lot I can say about that. It's always important to keep in mind a light source. Now I'm really shitty at doing that. I definitely try. It is an effort that I make, but it's very easy for me to forget when you don't keep a light source in mind. Things can look okay. It's not a make or break sort of thing for a drawing, but it just helps to make things look more cohesive. I just realized I should put some paper on underneath. Then I blend it out some more. Then I gotta go and layer some more. We'll take our shading colors and then I just layer on top. Honestly, I mostly just put color down where I think it would be, which might not be the best thing to do, but here I am doing it. Let's color her eyes really quick. It's because they're right here. This is the only yellow in her design. So, can I use this to add like some blush? Yeah, that's not working out. Yeah, it's just a lot of this. This is a part of the reason why I have so many markers. I use a lot of layering and a lot of blending. So more markers are kind of necessary, I guess. But it really just all depends on what style you have. Another thing you might notice is that sometimes when I color, I could demonstrate on this. I'll push it down and then flick. I just like the way it looks. That's all there is to it. I like how it has that harsh edge to it. I mostly do it in hair, but you can also see me doing it here on the fingers. My drawing process can vary a little bit depending on what material I'm using, but there are still general rules that I like to keep in my art. Even if I have to apply things differently to get a similar effect, I still try to keep a similar style, which can be surprisingly difficult when you're working with different materials. Let's actually do her sweater vest next, because it has similar colors to it. And yeah, it's the same sort of rules apply to the clothing. I'll add the base tone and the highlights at the same time. Then I'll go in with the shades. I guess from there, I'll add the grays and the blacks. Add some of this tone. Let's actually add it just right here. Lay the gray over it anyway, which should tone it down. And then we blend. And we layer. And we layer. And we layer, and then we blend. I needed to get a refill for that brown I was talking about earlier. It's still this within the same purplish thing, so it gives off a similar effect, but it's a little less saturated, so it tends to blend in with the colors a little bit easier. And then for this darker color, I have a black marker. Now, I very rarely use black, so I'll either apply it very lightly and then go into this dark gray and then blend that out. Or I'll do this other blending technique where I take both of them and I touch the tips together. Low-key inappropriate, to be honest. But then that lets the inks mix a little bit on the nib of the marker and it lets it blend a little bit easier. If you haven't guessed by now, I really like to have a soft look to a lot of my drawings, and using black it's such a harsh color, so I really try to avoid it. I don't use colorless blenders. You've probably noticed by now. Honestly, they're not really necessary, but a big misunderstanding with them on how to use them. You actually put the blender down first and then put the markers on top. If you put a colorless blender on top of marker, it'll actually lift the color rather than blending it. But as you can see, it's not really a necessary item. Blend that out. Let's add this pink. I need a refill. This is not going to last. Welcome to my Copic refilling tutorial. Take the cap off. Take the other cap off. Pull out the chisel nib. And then you just plump it in there, baby. You can also leave the chisel nib in and just have the ink on there. It takes a little bit longer to fill it that way. And also, I have baby wipes. It's very effective at cleaning up alcohol stickiness. I don't know why, I don't know what's in these baby wipes, but they're very useful, so I'd recommend grabbing some. But just like that, marker is filled and ready to go. I just realized I forgot to color in her sleeve. Silly me. So with markers, I tend to work on a much smaller paper size. It's just a lot easier to get flat colors with a paper this size. This is a regular 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock that I cut in half. As you can see, the chisel nib is meant to cover larger areas, but that being said, it's still quite small. So I normally don't recommend working on a piece of paper bigger than 8.5 by 11. Don't get me wrong, there's still definitely ways that you could work bigger with markers. It just takes a little effort. This one's also running out of ink. Dear Lord. I don't think I have a refill for this one though. Welcome to my YouTube channel where all my markers are dying simultaneously. What are you doing now? Kind sir, can you not? This boy and his outside tools. The audacity, how dare he try and keep the outside nice and tidy for everybody. The disrespect. I think that's just about it for the coat. I don't remember if this is running out of ink or not. And it is, what do you know? Oh, I forgot to color in her headband. I'm an incredible artist who never forgets anything. I just realized I forgot to color in her sleeve. Also, I think this is a great time to say, don't be afraid to use several different materials in a piece. Up until now, I've used only Copics, but now I'm using Tumblr brush markers. It took me a while to figure that out, and it's like, of course, that's such an obvious thing. I don't know, I feel like it's something that you don't really think about. So yeah, just try different brands. Experiment, combine them together. When I color hair, I'll color in like one solid block like that, and it'll go up and I'll feather it out. And then in that white spot, look at the highlight color and just blend it out. Similar to what I've been doing before. It's just how I like working. To be honest, it's probably because of Fairy Tail. If you've seen the manga art style, there's something similar in there. And I used to copy the Fairy Tail art style a lot when I was younger. So a lot of my art habits came from that. Since this is the inside of her hair, it wouldn't have any highlights. Now with hair, I like to go back to up here and darken this up and then blend it out. I really love the contrast between the shade color and the highlight. It just makes everything look extra shiny. Is it something that I overdo in my art? Possibly. Am I gonna stop? Absolutely not. Wonder if I should use this one. Oh my god! I flunked the plate. Wonder if I should use this one for an even darker shade. Layer over. Oh, wrong side. Let's layer over this again. There we go. Hair is colored. And thus, we can end the marker adventure. So long as I stop touching things up, which it seems like I'm not. Couple more steps I do. First, colored pencils. Totally unnecessary step. This is just some finishing touches I like to add. If I don't add blush with a marker, I'll add it with colored pencil. Similar to how I take 1 or 2 markers and add it throughout the piece, I'll take 1 or 2 colored pencils and add them throughout the piece. It's mostly just in the shadows. Sometimes I'll add colors to highlights. I'm using Prismacolor color pencils. These are the only colored pencils I've ever really used, to be honest, but I'm sure there's a lot of good alternatives out there. If you have any good colored pencil alternatives, let me know. For the colored pencil, there's really no rhyme or reason where I put it. Basically, it's just when I'm looking at the drawing anywhere I think it would look good, and that's it. After that, I'll add some white highlights. I use the Uniball Signo white gel pen. It's my favorite that I've ever used. I've never used a better gel pen. I know that the, Sakura gel pens, whatever they're called, Jelly Roll, that stuff. I know that those are quite popular. Honestly, I don't really like them. They are a little bit cheaper, so if money's an issue, then that's an option. Most of the highlights end up going in the hair, but sometimes I'll add these lines across the edge of something, which is just a similar effect to like rim lighting. Now it's the other unnecessary step of adding washi tape. I have a lot of tape, but I do like adding it. It's a really, I think it's a nice touch. I'll look through my collection. I'll find a bunch that I think look nice, and then I'll narrow down my options. I usually don't pick any more than 3. More typically, there's 2. I really like how these moon ones look. Basically, I'll just use them to fill up space. So like right now, I'm going to put them right here on the sides because there's a lot of empty space there. So taking an X-Acto knife, taking my scissors. And then I'll also just kind of play around with different layouts of it. So I think I want to have one long one along here, bend this over the edge, and I'll take my X-Acto knife. It's not difficult at all to cut through the tape without cutting through the paper, because washi tape is super thin. It can sometimes be hard to see through. So like this one was kind of hard because it's very dark, but since it's a lot thinner, it's a lot easier to guess where the line would be. And last but not least, I sign it. There we go. Here's the end result. I hope that you enjoyed it. My light is blinking red, so I'm gonna have to end this now. Let me know your thoughts on this. If you have any questions about my drawing process, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. I'd be happy to do my best to answer them. I can't get to every question, but I'll try my best. And if you're new here, hello. I am Oliver. I post a lot of art videos on this channel. I post a video every single Wednesday and other bonus videos whenever I can. If this is the first video you're seeing of mine, feel free to stick around. I would really appreciate it. And you can also follow me on social media, which will be on screen now and linked in the description box below. I'd recommend following me on Instagram because that is where I am most active, and that's where I post my art other than YouTube, obviously. And there will also be some videos on screen now and linked in the icon for you to check out if you want. Thanks so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you next week. Goodbye.